Okay, guess what? It's 1 o'clock. I was just telling Kathy Gadigian that one of the hardest things about doing a live K-12 PR chat is I feel like I need about 9 arms, and so that I can tweet and advance slides and hold the mic and do all those things. So this is going to be a fast-paced, one of the most fast-paced 2-hour sessions you've ever been in. What's that, kind of like an oxymoron right there? But as people are coming on into the session, please move to the front. We'll be working in table settings for the second 30-minute session. And so I want to make sure we get started here and stay on time, because the one thing a chat is very time oriented, okay? So we're going to get going. This is a session standing at the PR crossroad when privilege meets social justice. And let me tell you, I am immensely humbled to be standing up here, and I'm extremely humbled to have the agreement of our 9 panelists to help us today with the live chat. Because if there's ever a topic I feel woefully inadequate on, it would be this one. But have we not had some great messaging this whole NSPRA seminar it's been amazing. I have gone to some great sessions. We had a great keynote. We have just some amazing districts doing some wonderful things. And I tackle this topic because it's a personal story and a personal journey. My name is Julie Thannum, and I am Assistant Superintendent for Board and Community Relations for Carroll ISD in Southlake, Texas. That is a high-performing, high socioeconomic, used to be mostly white community. That's a key point there. Mostly white community sitting next to DFW Airport. That's about the best way that I could describe us. We have 8,400 students, so by most, measurements, we're not huge. If you drive 5 miles out of any direction in our district, you're out of Southlake. You're out of Carroll ISD. So we're small, we're mighty, I like to say. But let me tell you, when things happen in Carroll ISD, it makes the news. And that's not the kind of news you want to be known for. But today's chat is going to bring a lot of different things, and I know you're all somewhere different on this personal journey. I wanted to take a little bit to say this is what's going to happen in our agenda. We're going to talk a little bit about the introduction of the topic, and I'm going to touch it so briefly. I worry a little bit about there's so much that has happened in the last year to us in our district. Even trying to compartmentalize it a little and share with you about where we are on our personal journey could be a little difficult. It's just still really difficult to talk about. The next 30 minutes will be roundtable sharing. And you have moderators at each of your tables that were either on the K-12 PR chat live panel last year when we talked about growth mindset, and we started talking a little bit about that personal wellness that Sean and Kristen just did an excellent session on. And that roundtable sharing is for you to come away with ideas. We will also have a Google Share Drive that has documents already that you will have access to, and we'll add things all year long. I hope we continue this conversation all year. And then the final hour is going to be a live K-12 PR chat that will go super quick, and we'll bring our 9 panelists up, and we'll throw a question up, and I'll explain a little bit how that's going to work, because it's the fastest 60 minutes in your life. I'm not kidding. K-12 PR chat, this is a little bit about it. It's an online learning and professional development chat. It's on Twitter. It occurs twice a month between seminars, and it has been going on for several years now. It's kind of the brainchild of Dane Dellenbach and Kristen Majette and Delana McCormick and a few others I'm sure I'm not mentioning, and it has just continued to grow. Some of our chats are representative of 26 states, multiple countries, and we have actually joined chats with superintendents across the country, and we've also joined up with some of our partners in K-12 education and experts in other subject matters, and we just want you to join the chat. So it can be a little overwhelming if this is your first time. It's okay. You'll be a little bit on sensory overload, but we try to tackle tough topics and keep the conversation going all year long, seminar to seminar. Our panelists today all have their own stories. I wish that I could give the mic to them and let them share their stories. You have a bio on your table for each of them with their contact information. It's also in the Google Shared Drive, what I'm going to give you the link to. But I want you to see that we got people across the nation. We wanted to spread out. Every community is different. Every community has its different experiences and is in a different place. And we wanted to make sure that we were representative of that. Some of them come from very small districts on purpose, some mostly white districts on purpose, some very diverse urban districts who are a lot further along in this journey. But it's important to understand that everybody has a personal journey and you're in it somewhere. And if you're like us, for too long it was ignored in our district. And we're really making a lot of strides now. And it really warms my heart to see what's happening. And I've got so many ideas from sessions here and our keynote speaker to take back. Our panelists, again, are from all across the country. You can read a little bit about them. They have expertise in lots of other areas besides this. Some of them would tell you they don't feel like experts in this topic. Again, the key for having a K-12 PR chat is you join where you are. We say often that you need to lead where you are in school PR. And if you don't have a seat at the table, that's okay. You inch it there every single day by what you do, with your ethics, with the advice that you give. And who will ever listen? Inch your chair to that table. And when you get to the decision table and you are starting to guide people in career moves and decisions that can affect a lot of children and a lot of people, it is a tremendous responsibility that we don't take lightly. So these panelists have reputations in their districts of being strategic advisors, and they were chosen for that specific purpose. My personal journey, again, is really coming from cultural humility. I'm not an expert. I have a responsibility, I think, to be in the conversation. I actually had a very respected colleague say to me when we talked about doing this session, people of color do not want to look in the door and see a bunch of white people talking about diversity. And I reflected on that and I thought, you know what? That's exactly who needs to be in the room talking about diversity. So I'm going to talk to my white friends for just a second. Whatever your circle of influence is, wherever you are on this journey, really need to reflect on the fact that privilege is a very powerful thing, and we have taken it for granted too long. My church is going through this personal journey as well to build a more multicultural church, and I'm so proud of the work they're doing. And they've put all their leaders through training. I've looked at the training. They've shared the materials with my school district. And while there's some things church-related that we wouldn't be using in the public schools, there's some very important messaging there. And my preacher stood up the other day and he said, you know, it's hard to see a system that's broken when it works for you. And so to my white friends in the room, we have to be having this conversation. And to my friends who are not white and have not had that privilege, there's not anything I can say other than there are a lot of people that have a lot of love in their heart and have a lot to offer. And I hope we can all come to the table together. And I know that's what we want. I know that's what we want. You need to be doing that in your district. So I don't want something bad to happen in your district for this conversation to start. It was late coming in our district. Talking about my personal journey, it's kind of interesting. So I'm actually the one on the leadership team that in 2016 did a PowerPoint where you could have heard a pin drop. Because I said our demographics are changing and we have done nothing to prepare for it. I showed pictures that made people uncomfortable. I talked about topics that made people uncomfortable. And I knew we weren't ready for the message. We did nothing. In 2017, I was NSPRA president, and I don't know how many of you know this, and I'm not going to dwell on this situation, but it really opened my eyes. We were called out as a national organization for cultural appropriation. Being real authentic here, I had to look it up. What did they mean? What were they talking about? They were very concerned about some of the decorations, and we had members that felt marginalized by some of the things that were being done. And I'm from Texas, and the Latino history in San Antonio is celebrated everywhere you go. And so, but it did make me realize that there's a conversation that needs to be happening. And I sat with those individuals. They were NSPRA members. And I asked them, how does this make you feel? Stephen Nichols and I were there. And I said, I'm listening. I don't know what we need to do. I don't know what we shouldn't have done or what we should have done. But as an organization, we have lots of members, and I don't want anybody to feel left out or marginalized. Then in 2018, After I stood up here, not exactly here, but leaving a live chat last year on growth mindset, talking about having a difficult year after my year as NSPRA president, little did I know I would have a worse year. It happens in our job. My community looked to me, and I was sitting there thinking, my goodness, I had to look up cultural appropriation, and you want me to write a cultural competency action plan? And so we do what we do, right? I started with my 4-step process. I started thinking about engagement. I started talking to people. I started listening. I started researching. I started doing what we do with every other problem, whether it's a bond election or a PR issue or anything. And I said, my community is counting on me. And I'm the one that said in 2016 we need to do something about it. Now we have to. Now we're being reactive. Why are we here today? Because of headlines like this. And you guys have seen them all year long. Mine's at the bottom. Viral video prompts diversity plan in Carroll ISD. I was so mad at people in my district. And the reason I was mad is because several years ago I told them this was going to happen. But we're not I told you so people, right? But I felt like one. I was angry that the response wasn't more proactive when I brought it up. That our changing demographics, that we could have any kids in our district that would feel marginalized and left out. That they would hear racist comments. That comments about so hurtful, parent after parent would come to our board meeting and tell us about. And so my district was forced to deal with this issue. Now, I do want to give them a plug because it's an amazing district. We do a lot of great things. We actually had a diversity council plan in our strategic plan, an action step that we had put on hold because we were dealing with school safety and mental wellness issues. That was kind of what all our parents were talking about. Nobody was talking about this when I was talking about this. How many times are you looking around the corner in your district and we just have to patiently wait for people to catch up with us, right? And so I don't want you to feel that you're alone. If you haven't heard that at this conference, you are not alone. And wherever you are in your personal journey, in your district's journey, there's someone there that is in the same place, and that actually you can reach out to for resources. I wanted to show a few of the steps taken immediately. And I say a few because, wow, it's been a whirlwind. Since we not only had one video, but we had another video, racial video, went out on social media. The first video hit 3 million hits in like the first few hours. I could not even believe how fast it picked up. We were accused of only worrying about our image because it went out on social media. We were accused of a lot of things. But I can tell you that I work with people that care about kids, and we wanted that video down because every time another child in our district watched it, it was hurtful. Every time an adult had to see it, it was hurtful. We have administrators. We have people of color administrators on our staff that begin to tell me stories about things that have been said to them. I have an administrator. She is amazing. In my district, leading special programs, that was told in the community somewhere, you're the cleanest colored girl I've ever seen. And my heart broke when she told me that story, and I'm like, why did you not come tell us? And I'm learning it's just not something, it's just something that you become so accustomed to, and that's a shame. That's wrong. That needs to stop, and I think dialogue in your community, you need to find out and talk and listen, engage, and find out what's happening. We did put out a public statement condemning the racial slur video. I had some of my colleagues right here in this room look at that statement. For the most part, it went really, really well. They picked it apart. You know how people do, like, you said this part, and this must mean you meant this. We actually said we weren't making any excuses for what our kids did. But they're our kids, and they're not going away, right? And so we don't get to just expel them and send them away. We have to educate them. We have to bring them back. We have to teach them a better way. And that's what we set out to do. But we did immediately hand down student consequences. Now, this was an off-school event. Off-school. On social media. So we got all the free speech people. I got my journalism degree hanging on the wall, folks, and I can argue free speech with you every day. But when it disrupts the educational environment and safety becomes a factor, and I look at a teary-eyed African-American football player in my district and says to me, Ms. Thannum, I'm afraid to come to school, then that is a school problem. And so we took action. We took swift action, and they got punishment according to our student code of conduct, but we realized our student code of conduct was weak. The wording was weak. So this month, on Monday, we will toughen up, and our board will unanimously, I have no doubt, they will unanimously adopt stricter and tougher wording in our student code of conduct. That was one of our first steps. We added temporary security and visibility at the school because we had to, because kids were afraid to come to school. Absenteeism was going up. There were rumors of threats. You know what I'm talking about? Where there was never really any threat against harm, but there were the rumors of threats. And so we had strong visibility with caring administrators that went to our high school, especially our 9 and 10 grade campus. And we wanted them to know school is going to be a safe place for you to be. And whatever's happened to you in the past, we are now on your side like we've never been before. And we're sorry that you felt like you couldn't come to us, but now that you have, guess what? We make a strong team. Watch out, get out of our way, right? We partnered with our mayor. This became a community-wide thing, and our mayor called and said, okay, I'm not putting up with this in my town. She's very strong. She's an amazing leader. And she said, you put out your statement first, and I'll follow up. And I'll tell parents it's time to wake up. And she did, and I didn't even have to be that strong with the way she was. She was amazing. And we had consistent and shared messaging. I wrote a draft Cultural Competence Action Plan. It's not great. It uses the 4-step process, and initially it didn't even do that because I had just 48 hours to put a plan before my school board. 48 hours to write a plan on something that my district had done no training or anything. Thank God for APR. Here's your plug for APR right here. Because I took the 4-step process and I just went running with it. I contacted many of you. I reached out. I borrowed stuff off your website. I gave you credit when I said, hey, I found this at this district. But we really started working. And that draft plan, and it's still a draft, and I'll explain why in a second, but that draft plan is in the document. But it is not going to be the best plan you see, because these panelists up here have better plans than I do. I just know that some of you aren't in the same place they are in their districts, and you might need to start where I started. Oh, let me go back. One more thing I wanted to point out there. We did district-wide diversity training. We held a board meeting that the press came to that was heartbreaking. I had to sit with a camera on my face the whole time and hear horror story after horror story. And the hardest thing was that most of them, I've been at the district 23 years. I hadn't heard most of the stories. I had someone stand up and say, my son was the first black quarterback. And I turned around and I said, wait, did I miss the story that we had a first black quarterback? And I was guilty of the person saying that I didn't really see color. That colorblindness is wrong, because if you don't see their color, my color, right? If you don't see my color, then you don't see who I am. If you don't see my culture, my ethnicity, you don't know who I am. And so that is not celebrating. But that's where our teachers were. Our teachers were, well, I treat all children the same. I love all children. It doesn't matter what their religion is, their race is. And that was actually not what was happening. And so it was very important for us to listen. And that's what we did for a long time. We sat and we listened and we wiped tears and we hugged people and we said we were sorry and we said we'll do better and we said, will you join us? And they did. That's the amazing part. Well, we brought in kindness, anti-bullying, diversity speakers. By the way, most diversity speakers, they don't talk about diversity. I'm sorry, they don't. They come in, they talk about being nice to people. It's not the same thing. Having a kindness campaign and an anti-bullying campaign is not the same thing as really building cultural competence or cultural proficiency in your district. So that when people say, well, we've got a anti-bullying program, that is not the same thing. You want cultural awareness. You want to celebrate the differences. And it's not just about saying be nice to people. We created a diversity council, which was in our strategic plan from 2015 that nobody had done. But we've already done it. We have campus diversity councils at every campus. We hired a leadership and culture coach, and he's amazing. And he's been going around, and I got to go with him all year, face to face, meeting with kids and hearing about kids' experience. By the way, kids are way more forgiving. They're like, it's so great you came out to have lunch with us. Sure, we'll talk to you. Guess what happened to me last week? Oh, no, it's okay. My friends stood up for me. We heard as many positive stories as we did negative stories. And so when you're in the middle of a negative PR situation, get out and talk to your kids, because they have a lot of hope, and they will give you hope when you're not feeling like you have very much. And let me tell you something. I've been more disappointed in adults right now than I could even stand up and say. So disappointed in the reaction of some adults. Oh, well, they were just singing a song. Oh, that word's not that bad. Oh, it had an A on the end, you know? So that makes it okay. Oh, well, other people can sing it, but we can't sing it. I have heard all those defense mechanisms over and over again, and I can proudly say that they're really wonderful, amazing people. They don't know what they don't know. And it was up to us as a district to build that cultural capacity. We held face-to-face meetings with our students where we really listened. We held a public school board meeting where trustees sat, just like you guys are going to, and talked to our students. They were not up at the board table. They were down there. And we met with kids, and it was so amazing. And the press came out, and this is so funny. I taped off a little area, and I told the press, you have to stay there. Because I don't want mics in kids' faces. This is an open meeting, but I don't want mics on kids. I want them to talk freely. I don't want them afraid of what you're going to put on. You can interview anybody you want before and after. You can hold your mic up and get whatever you want during the meeting, but I'm not letting you out of that little taped area. And they stayed there. It was like, everybody was like, hey, can y'all believe the reporters are standing over in their taped off area? They wanted to be a part of something really good too, and they thanked us, and we got very, very positive response from that. We knew the same things we do in any PR issue. Engage your staff. They need training. They're afraid to say the wrong thing. They will say the wrong thing. As we heard from our keynote speaker, talk anyway. They're going to say the wrong thing, but equip them, train them, bring in great speakers, and give them professional development opportunities. We've had some great dialogue with our teachers. Engage our students. They are so smart. They're the smartest generation, and they really have a lot of hope to bring to your district. And so you want to really listen. Engage your community. Find a way to survey. We are borrowing and modeling a census. We probably won't call it that now that there's lots of controversy about census, but we're going to do a survey because we want to know, what are our top religions in our district? All those things that you're told never to ask people, we're going to ask them because we want to know, and we want to tell them that the reason we want to collect this information is so we can celebrate your kids and your culture and your religious holidays and the things that are important to you and your family. We want them to be important to our dragon family as well. We're all dragons. I know that's a little weird. But anyway, that's our mascot. So when you hear me say that, that's what that means. But we have a diverse citizen groups, and it's been amazing. So many powerful people reaching out. We did our student dialogues that I mentioned that went so well, but we've also been focusing a lot on our employees because they're the ones in front of the kids. We brought in trainers. We've talked about things about like white identity, even white supremacy, cultural awareness, their implicit bias, that they, microaggressions that our kids told us were happening or happened years ago. White fragility, the defensiveness people feel every time, a white person is approached with something. Culturally competent pedagogy. My daughter's a second grade teacher. I'm going to embarrass her because she's right back there. She's a second grade teacher in my district, and she came and she said, we don't have books that represent the children in my classroom. And she said, and any books that are about kids, people of color or other religions or relations are about that topic. They don't make them like the heroes of the stories and things like that. It's all about them being black or Muslim and she said, we've got to find better books, and our teachers, they're on a mission. They're going to they're pushing the envelope there to find better books and culturally competent test questions and things that bring into the pedagogy and the work that we do to have kids feel represented so they don't feel hidden. Our diversity council, I know, you never put a committee together this big. We were hoping to have a small committee. We had 180 applications, and we put 63 people on our diversity council, our district council, and then over 125 were invited for every campus council. So we now have active meetings every month. They formed 6 subcommittees. This is why my Cultural Competency Action Plan's not done, because the subcommittees are doing their work over the summer, and I'm going to show you what those are, but they're doing their work to bring back SMART goals for us to add to our Cultural Competency Action Plan. And that then will be integrated into our strategic plan. So I feel like we're moving in the right direction, even if it ended up being reactive. Here's our 6 subcommittees. Celebration of cultural bias, reduction and awareness, curriculum and instruction, teacher and staff recruitment, communication and outreach, professional development, student-led education and policy. Our students are leading a lot of the sessions and presentations in our diversity councils, and it's fantastic because they're not complaining about how things are. They're telling us what they want it to look like and how they think we can get there. And so the difference between the first video that happened in October and the video that happened in February is that the students came to us the second time, and they said, Mrs. Thannum, Mrs. McDade, look at this video. This is out on social media. It's happening again. We got to stop it. And they trusted us to do that. And it was a very different response. And we still came out strong, but it was great that our kids trusted us because we were at the table with them. So we have our Cultural Competence Action Plan. I use research, planning, and implementation and evaluation in it. Again, I'm still working on it. So I had 48 hours to put something together. I had like 10 bullet points when it was presented. And I was like, oh my gosh, if my APR friends see this written plan, they are going to think I am crazy. But I had to get something down. And we also had to show people we're not just waiting for a committee to tell us what we know we already need to be doing. Does that make sense? We really wanted them to see that we already knew we needed to be doing some of these things. Rena Brown, there's an incredibly important, uncomfortable, and brave discussion that every single leader and every organization in the world should be having about privilege. And we are having that conversation in Carroll ISD. And I couldn't be more proud of how our community has taken a very terrible, negative thing and turned it around. Literally turned it around. And we are a long way from the finish line if we ever get there. Our plan is not even called cultural proficiency on purpose. We have so far to come. We have so far to go. So if you've ever seen the continuum of cultural competency and tried to figure out exactly where your district was, I'll tell you, Carroll ISD, one of the top performing districts in the state, with amazing kids and amazing formulas for success. We're not perfect, but we were somewhere between the orange and the yellow. And I was embarrassed by that. And I was sad by that. I was brokenhearted by that. And we're changing that. And I'm making my mission in my church's project or changes and in my district with this plan that we're going to make some changes and we're going to get a lot further. We're striving for cultural competence. I hope someday I can stand up here and say we made it to the purple. But this is a rainbow that makes me sad because I think too many of our districts and our communities are not in a good place. And so that's in the PowerPoint as well that you'll be able to see. And there's some definitions of what that looks like. We definitely had some bullying and different things going on, but more than anything, it was just kind of a total ignoring of a problem. Our teachers didn't want to really engage because then parents would get upset and then they would get attorneys. In Carroll ISD, if they tell you they're going to get an attorney, they do. And they sue you. And so a lot of times our teachers take the path of least resistance. They're amazing people, but they can't battle that, right? And so we have to really give them the power. We have to empower our teachers to speak up on behalf of kids and to say, nope, I'm going to stop what I'm doing and say this isn't okay. And I'm going to get involved here. And this continuum, again, will be in the PowerPoint with the link that I share with you. But if your district hasn't seen this, and I know a lot of you are well beyond this perhaps, but please take a look at it. Okay, it's about time to share, okay? So here's what we're going to do. I want you to know, Rena Brown has another quote that I love. I'm reading, I literally am reading all her books right now at once, so that kind of gets a little confusing in my head sometimes. So if I get her quote messed up, I'm not meaning to. She said, vulnerability is not knowing victory or defeat, it's understanding the necessity of both. It's engaging, it's being all in. And so what I'm asking you as school PR folks, I've been in NSPRA so many years, I'm a past president, and after 30 years in school PR, this is one area that we're so far behind in. Somebody said, wouldn't you hate to be judged in your whole career by the one thing you just didn't quite get to do as well as you would like? And so I'm going to let everybody get off the hook right now. Wherever your district is in this journey, and you may be well ahead of where we are, give yourself the opportunity to learn and be a part of the conversation and take that conversation back to your community. I know your districts are doing amazing things, so here's what we're going to do. You have facilitators at every table, and the next 30 minutes you're going to talk and share 3 different things. And I even asked Edmonds Schools, where are you? Back here, Kimberly. So she did an amazing session, drew that 8 o'clock on Monday morning, and I walked in there and they had audio problems and they had, I think it was hot in there. I think I had the heater coming down on me, and they started talking and it was just amazing. It was great what they were doing, and so I asked her to come today. Thank you for being here and share at your table. You're going to share what's your story. Where's your district on that cultural competency continuum? Where do you find yourself? Where are you far into this journey, not so far into the journey? And then 2, what's your district doing? Share some real ideas. And my moderators, I think, Sean or somebody had a great idea over here to maybe take some notes. If somebody's got a computer, an iPad, or just turn over one of those handouts, take some notes on the district and maybe some things they're doing so we can collect. And I'll reach out to those individuals and those districts and add things to the Google Docs. But share one or two things in your district that you're doing to promote diversity, inclusion, and equity. I promised my district I would go home with ideas, more ideas, okay? How can NSPRA help? As a professional learning organization, we have a VP on the board for these particular type of topics that I think for far too long have gone undiscussed by so many of our NSPRA members. But we have had tracks. There has been things going, and NSPRA has been moving in that direction. And we have some really amazing things happening. But what can we do more? Okay, facilitators, you got it. Next 30 minutes. I am going to cut you off. Let's cut off about 25 after, because if you've never been in a chat, I need to explain kind of how it works. And we'll let our panelists come up and get ready for the live chat. Okay? Have at it. Okay, about one more minute. If you can kind of wrap up that idea, my panelists can start working their way to the stage. Okay, panelists, if you can move your way up here. I told you the time goes fast, doesn't it? Okay, as they're making their way up here. We're not kidding when we say that we want K-12 PR chat to be as many people that want to join it as possible. And last year we pledged with the panelists that were here, and we didn't draw a Wednesday afternoon time last time, so we had a lot bigger group. But we pledged then that there were more people that we wanted on the stage and more people we wanted to hear from. And so that's why you're going to see additional panelists, different from last year. But I want to explain a little bit as you're doing. If you've never been involved in a chat, I want to explain a little bit how it's going to happen, because it's so fast. I jumped up here and started going because of the time and didn't even give Michael Frost a chance to introduce or do what he was supposed to do as VP. I him apologizing to him. I'm like, I saw it was 1 o'clock. I grabbed the mic and just ran. So I said, I apologize. Guess what? Next year you can be on our panel. So next year you can be on our panel. We're going to pass microphones, and I can pass this one too. Okay, so here's what's going to happen. When you chat, all right, you're listening, watching the screen, and watching your phone and typing at the same time, okay? So it's not easy, especially for people like me. So you're going to read the questions that appear on the screen. You're going to listen to what panelists have to share, because some of them are going to share with the group their responses to those questions, and we'll let them talk as long as we can, as the time permits. You can tweet your own responses, but be sure that you put, like, if it's Q1, you're going to put A1. All right? A1, and then your answer. But you got to put the hashtags, or it doesn't connect the conversation. So it does take a little bit to catch on to this if you've never done it. Interacting, don't forget to respond to people. I've been up here doing that already with some amazing comments and things that people are saying and adding to the conversation. Carla Piera is adding things. So she's already had to head home and was going to be on our panel with us and said, I will be following along with and that's what's so amazing about Twitter. Okay, so we can connect with one another. But you can always include those hashtags, and that's how it's going to work. So, I told you, this is where we're going to get ready in our questions. We're going to jump from, the question's going to come up here, and then we're going to jump to the NSPRA tag board so you can see responses that are happening from people who aren't even in the room. There are people in other sessions that are commenting on the content that's coming out of here. And our panelists are going to respond, and I'm going to try to flip back and forth through my document that shows me who's going to speak first. And so on each question, I'm starting out with question 1. Daniel, you're getting ready, so let's hand the mic down to him and start to pass the mic. And so that's what we're going to have to do. Now, once Dan replies to question 1, and if he's done and we still have time, it's 6 minutes each question. That's how time goes so fast. He can pass it down and someone else say, I'd like to say something. You can keep going. And I'm going to go ahead and keep the questions moving, okay? So if we get a little behind, it's okay. Just keep moving. So the first one is introduce yourself and your district. Tell us what you believe it means to be culturally competent. And I'm passing it off to Dan Thigpen.
All right. And this is my first panel. and in this whole situation, so please feel free to kick me or stop me from talking, or if I'm doing it wrong, just let me know. My name's Daniel Thigpen. I'm the Director of Communication and Community Engagement for Folsom Cordova Unified School District. That's just about 20 miles outside of Sacramento, the state capital of California. We're a very interesting district. Mr. Stephen Nichols here was my predecessor, so he can attest to this as well. We serve two large, growing, and extremely different communities, one of which is increasingly diversifying. So we serve the cities of Folsom, which is a local, it's got a strong private sector, income is high, lots of college education, advanced degrees, and very little poverty. I think on that side of the district it's about 10 or 11%. And on the Rancho Cordova side, which was in the past a booming Air Force town, has become primarily an immigrant and refugee resettlement area. It's about 73 to 76% poverty. And when you look at our district as a whole, we're about 48% white, about 21% Latinx, another 20% or so Asian and Southeast Asian, and we're 5% African American. We're 5% African American. African Americans make up over 20% of our suspensions and expulsions. I'll say that again. We are 5% African American, and they make up over 20% of our suspensions and expulsions. So we've got a problem. And so we're having a lot of dialogue about cultural competence, and I think that Julie, she had several very good definitions up there, so I don't think we really need to walk through that, talking about the difference between cultural competence as an educator. My wife is a teacher in the region in a very diverse school. There's that culturally competent pedagogy. But then I like to think a little bit about what does cultural competence mean as a school district administrator, like ourselves, not just as PR communication leaders. And for me, it really is, we talk about, the fundamentals of it being listening to and understanding other cultures and our own cultures and how they interact and how they conflict and how we can navigate those things. And really what we're talking about is practicing a growth mindset, understanding that, at least the way I think about it, is that I'm a continual work in progress. I'm not going to reach a finite level of wokeness. It'd be a waste of energy. It's really through practicing relentless empathy. Relentless empathy for the families and students that we serve and who often aren't at the table and don't have voices in the process, creating space for those voices, and understanding that a lot of folks whose voices aren't represented at the table, it's because people who look like them are also not at the table. It's mostly a lot of folks that look like me. So I've had some conversations. Julie shared very honestly about kind of a journey in understanding privilege. That's something that our school district is going through right now a little bit, and we're our staff does not reflect the students that we serve. So we're having a lot of conversations about what it means to understand your privilege and then how to act on it, how to move past some of the guilt and really use that knowledge for good. And so for me, I try to think of it in a couple of ways. Looking for red flags in our dialogue and pushing other people's thinking around the table, recognizing and interrupting when there are issues that you see kind of casually every day. You're sitting on an interview panel, for instance, and you hear words like aggressive or condescending used toward the female African-American applicant that you wouldn't hear around maybe used in other ways. And then, really trying to use as many opportunities as possible just to talk to other white people. And not trying to demonstrate, again, a level of wokeness, but trying to use that privilege to help drive dialogue and change among other folks who can have an opportunity to use their privilege. So that's generally how I define it for me in my role, and again, it's still very much a work in progress.
Okay, anybody else? Grab the mic. We've got 8 minutes each question. See, I get myself flustered up here. It's not 6, it's 8. So anybody else want to answer that particular question, feel free to grab a mic. Leslie will grab it. Go ahead, Leslie.
So my name is Leslie Brewington. I work in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, Tuscaloosa City Schools. A couple of years ago, we had a reporter reach out to us who was very interested in doing some work on our school system. learning more about our school system, decisions that we made. We used to have a mega high school. That was the result of trying to achieve unitary status. I went to the University of Alabama. And when I would drive to school on campus, I would drive past one of the schools I now serve, and it had a sign out front. It said integrated 1978. I was born October 14th, 1978. So for me to think that that's something that somebody would chisel in stone and put on a sign, that integration happened in 1978, I did not envision myself eventually coming to work for that school system. When we hit, because I went into television, but when we achieved unitary status, decisions were made to go away from a mega high school to 3 neighborhood high schools. And as you can imagine, what would happen when you have no longer pooled all the resources, all the students, all the resources at the mega school and split them into neighborhood communities. And the result was we had lost some of our diversity. Some of our white families decided to go elsewhere. We had achievement gap issues. We had resource issues. And so when the reporter came to our campus, she wanted to look at the impacts of that decision about 15 years later. The results of that story was published in ProPublica in the Atlantic magazine, and a story was called Segregation Now. I don't know too many folks that want to have an article called Segregation Now. And it spurred a whole lot of spin-off stories and follow-up stories from other journalists in this country and across the pond. And Michelle Norris actually came to our community right when she was starting the RACE project. And so I got a chance to connect with her yesterday, and she remembers coming to Tuscaloosa and working with students in our school. And what their impacts were and how they viewed race. So in the past couple of years, we have been working towards how do you improve this? How do you get better outcomes for students? And that's a journey. But, I mean, I'm glad to be a part of a team that's looking at that and saying, you know, you get a spotlight shined on you sometimes. Sometimes it happens with a tweet. Sometimes it happens with a national article. But it's an opportunity to be reflective and to make changes where you can for kids.
Akwayenji, do we have time? How much time? Akwayenji, Director of Communications with the Cedar Rapids Community School District in Iowa. It's the second largest school district in the state. And we've got about 2,700 employees, 17,000 students. And about 4 years ago, the board hired a new superintendent. And the charge from that board to the superintendent was very clear. We need to make significant strides with closing the achievement gap and also addressing the issues of suspension, disproportionate numbers of suspension and office referrals of our African Americans, specifically our African American students. And so very quickly, our superintendent went to work with creating a new strategic plan, and the nucleus of that strategic plan was equity. And so we've worked very much from the inside out of our organization, starting with our leadership and focusing on exactly how we can incorporate a variety of strategies and initiatives around equity. And one of those was designing a new office, Office of Culture and Climate Transformation. And that office is tasked with a number of initiatives. But one is, again, focusing on the suspension rates. For instance, one of our middle schools, for 2 years in a row, every single black child in that middle school received an office referral. And so I'm really taking a hard look at that. But part of that has been owning that story publicly. So we haven't had a situation where, you know, the media nationwide has been knocking on our door or even really locally, but we've been proactive about owning our story and really examining exactly how we can move forward so that we can avoid those reactive situations.
Okay, we're moving to our second question. What are the biggest barriers to inclusion in education? The biggest barriers to inclusion, and I'm passing the mic off to Erica and then David O.
Hi, I'm Erica Chandler from Afton School District, which is a small district in St. Louis County. We actually border St. Louis City. We have about 2,800 kids. I was sharing earlier at my table, and while this is normal to me, I'm going to realize it's not normal to the rest of the world. So In St. Louis, in the early 80s, there was legislation passed that was, the purpose was desegregation. So if you are an African American in St. Louis City, you can opt, or at least apply for the program to have your kids go to a school in St. Louis County because the city schools were failing. So, with 2,800 kids, we have about almost 9% that are African American. The vast majority of those kids don't live in our district. They actually live in St. Louis City, which is maybe 15 minutes from us. But in all of St. Louis County, some of these kiddos are riding a bus for over an hour to get to school every day and back home. So, while I think we do here's where I think we have implicit bias. Well, I would tell you before this year, that our district would say, these are our kids, and everyone feels like these are our kids. There's not a difference. I am now not certain that these kids feel like they're our kids. We had a situation earlier this school year where one of our staff members was accused of using a racial slur against one of our students. While this situation proved not necessarily to be true, I think just that it happened shows that we need to take a deeper and more honest look at where we are in our district, especially at Julie's competence rainbow. I think our staff would tell you we're towards the purple, and I'm going to tell you we're not. So my goal this year is really to be the voice for equity and inclusion and take an honest look of where we are. So I'm going to be learning alongside all of you who are already further in that process than us. But I will tell you the biggest barriers through that whole story is I think a lot of our staff are just think they can do the things they've done the way they've always been done, and they're not thinking or recognizing that our world is different. So that's where we're going to go. I'm going to pass it to David O.
Thank you. I am David O. I am from a school district about 60 miles west of Chicago. We are surrounded 100% by cornfields. Literally cornfields. Our neighboring district is a very diverse district. We are not diverse in any capacity. I actually just looked at our report card and we're 85% white, closely followed by Hispanic. I would say we're probably even farther on the scale than Julie's district is. I think, yes, like Erica, everyone thinks we treat them all the same. However, this past May, we had an article written after graduation. The student who was interviewed was a minority, and he talked about the lack of diversity in our district. I took it into our superintendent on Monday and said, look, we need to kind of do something about this, and she didn't seem kind of concerned, and I was like, that's not okay. We need to kind of work on this. I would say we are trying to be more inclusive to our Hispanic population. Our district translator just became part of our comms office, so now everything from the district is going out in 2 languages. I would say that is the smallest baby step we are doing. And people think we're doing great, and I'm like, I kind of disagree with this. But it is where it is. I would say we probably are more inclusive in our special education and our transgender students. We, I would say, probably have a high percentage of transgender for the demographic and the location of our school district. We started to make changes before our state required us to do it. We switched all of our gender-specific bathrooms to just bathrooms. So we kind of are very ahead there. And not very ahead. I mean, we're making small steps. But before the state really came down and our Supreme Court kind of said, you have to do this, we had already done it. So we do have the best interest of students, but we definitely have a long way to go. But it's kind of those baby steps that are getting us there, and hopefully one day we'll be farther up on that scale.
Okay. Anybody else want to tackle this question? We got a few more minutes. Barriers that you've experienced, anything?
I would go ahead and just jump on what I was describing before, where you've got to focus on public opinion, right? Being public with your story, what current state is, and then knowing that you're going to get some feedback, if you will, from the public as to what the information really looks like in the context of your district. But then also, I'm curious, when we're talking about social justice, it gets political really quickly. We all know that. And to what degree then does a barrier become families and parents who would be pushing back against something like gender-neutral bathrooms? And how do we educate our families? How do we educate the public on these kinds of initiatives and changes that they'd be seeing with their students? I think so. Just public opinion and then really focusing on informing parents would be a barrier that we try to work through.
Can I add on to that real quick? Just you're talking about how do you anticipate and advise and navigate around pockets of resistance. I don't want to forget about our staff and really trying. I think one of the biggest barriers that we have is when is the system starting to soften the dialogue in exchange for not talking about the right things because we're worried about pockets of resistance? Are we talking about mindset, or are we intentionally specifically talking about race? And oftentimes what we find is that we start moving away from calling it what it is because we're worried about those things that we're describing. We're seeing people getting angry or maybe disengaging and not supporting the work, but a lot of the conversations we've been having in our district is how do we remove those barriers from the beginning so that our teachers are not disengaging from the conversation, recognizing their truth is that maybe they're on a different part of the journey than maybe where the leadership is right now. Let's bring them in a space where it is safe for them to mess up, because if they are behind the work, their parents and the families who trust them are least likely to escalate.
Let's face it, this topic is no different than any other type of school PR problem that you address in that you have to know your community. And Carla and I have talked about this. What they're doing in Peel, I could not necessarily do in the conservative Bible Belt of Texas. However, I introduced her survey, her census, to my diversity committee members and showed them what other districts were doing. And they went through it and they helped me know what they thought the threshold in our community, what types of questions we could ask, what people would not get offended by or upset by. And it was different in Texas than it was in Canada. So that's like anything you do. You have to know your community and know who to engage. Okay, we're coming at you with question number 3. How do we ensure our school employees understand the value and importance of diversity? So concentrating right now on school employees, I'm going to toss this to Curtis and then to Stephen.
I'm Curtis Campbell. I'm the Public Information Officer for Shoreline Public Schools. We're a suburb just north of Seattle. I think it's critical and very important that it starts at the top. It really starts with your superintendent and school board, and not only having them be supportive of it, but actually actively advocating and championing it. In my district, we have went through an audit, a diversity audit a few years ago through the support of our local ESD, our Educational Service District. And one of the recommendations that they put forth was that we create an equity department and hire an equity director. And that costs resources. That takes a lot to put a department together and to find someone who can lead that work and define what that work is going to be. And so we did that, and when the board invested that money, and the superintendent led the charge for creating this new department. And through the work that department has done over the past few years, we now have codified in policy a race and equity policy. It's in the I think the Google Doc or Drive form that Julie handed out, and you can see it. And so we have this policy that is all about race and equity, and that we believe, it says, the first sentence is, we understand and believe that there is institutional racism in our school systems. And to acknowledge that, and then set forth a set of policies and practices that start to chip away at that, I think is very critical. We have the equity director sits in our cabinet. So in every conversation we have, we always look through things through an equity lens. And speaking through an equity lens, in addition to the policy, we also have an race and equity decision-making tool. So that when we're going through decisions as a leadership team, we're looking at who's at the table, who's not at the table, what biases or lenses are we bringing to the table, what are we not seeing. And not only do we use that before we make a decision, we then come back afterwards and look at how that decision has been rolled out and implemented, and how has it impacted our various groups of students, staff, and families across the district. We've also made it a very intentional effort to devote a lot more funding to this effort. We have equity teams throughout each of our schools, and each school has an equity lead, which is a stipend position, so they get paid to help lead this work, because it's a lot of work and it's a lot of time and training that they go through. Our district's also funded over almost 300 people over the past few years to do courageous conversations training. It's through John Singleton's organization. And so we've started off through Beyond Diversity 1. We now have staff going through Beyond Diversity 2. And so to have your board and your superintendent champion this work, putting the chips where they should be, putting the funding where it needs to be, to give us the resources we need to help us lead us through this work. Because I can't tell you how incredibly beneficial it is to have an equity director. Dr. Tyishya Brandon-Felder, our equity director, I talk to her almost on a daily basis about all sorts of things that are communication related. And it's helped me focus how I'm going to use the skills and what I do in my district to support the equity work. So now every newsletter that goes out in the community, we always have front and center an article that has an equity angle or an equity focus, because we just want to permeate our community with what our values are and what we're about, and having that really helps. And also as a leadership team to continue to push ourselves to have uncomfortable conversations. I'm white and introverted, and it's hard for me to have a conversation about the weather. It's really hard for me to have a conversation about race and equity. And so to have the support of people like that, and to be able to bounce ideas off and get perspective and get support and say, hey, it's okay to, be wrong or not be the wokest person out there, that we're always progressing. And so to me, that's just a huge thing. And this year we're starting a book study with our cabinet on, it's called White Fragility. It's by Robin DiAngelo. And that's an uncomfortable book for the majority of our cabinet to talk about, because the majority of us are white. And I think someone mentioned Rena Brown earlier. To be courageous is to be vulnerable, and you have to be vulnerable to do this work. And I feel vulnerable all the time when I have conversations about race. And I feel like I grew up in an area that was, I was born and raised in an area that was about 85% Hispanic, and my wife is Latina. And so I feel like competent, when we talk about cultural competency, I feel like that's understanding the cultural differences and beliefs and values that various cultures have. And so growing up in the Yakima Valley and being in a biracial marriage and family, I feel like I'm culturally competent when it comes to Hispanic heritage and that group. But then when I moved to the Seattle area to take this new job, we have 80 languages in our district, so many different cultures represented, and I'm not culturally competent on all of them. So I think cultural competency is an ever-evolving sort of thing that we go through, because you can be culturally competent with regards to one group and be completely clueless with another group. And so it's recognizing that we just keep moving forward and learning together and having these tough conversations together. So.
Stephen?
Thanks. I'm Stephen. I'm a consultant based in Sacramento, California. And I, piggyback on Curtis, I totally agree. You can't be culturally competent in a continuum everywhere for everything. In fact, realizing that we're all vulnerable and that we're all exposed to a sense of blindness, things that you don't have to really look at. I think for employees and to assist in times that I coach on this is to make sure that there's systems of support for your employees. It's difficult to be vulnerable, and it's difficult to feel the mandate and the tide of public change right now. And so if you don't have an equity or inclusion director, have some sort of a framework and have some sort of a policy that they understand it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay that if you're the one that suspended someone because of, you thought it was a seemingly regular infraction, but you didn't see the trend that was taking place, they shouldn't feel shame to have to go through that process. They should know that the district is going to be supportive because employees are watching. I think demonstrating and encouraging representation in persons, places, and things is going to be really important, especially as a school communicator. I've said before in an eNetwork article that when people take a group picture, they were doing it last night at the museum out on the balcony over looking at the Capitol, the first person you look for in a group picture is yourself. And what happens when you don't see yourself in the picture? And since we're the ones with the picture and we're the ones with the camera, we've got to make sure that we don't, unbeknownst to us, take pictures of students that don't reflect the district or take pictures of employees that don't reflect the district. And so in hiring practices, make sure that you understand who your district is. When I started in 2006, 7 school year, Natomas Unified School District was the first district I was at. it was pretty diverse, and I think New York Times said that it was one of the most diverse school districts in the country. Well, what do you think our administration team looked like? And it wasn't aggressive, and it wasn't talked about, and they didn't have a plan for it. And speaking of plan, do not be afraid to go after the achievement of diversity in a strategic plan, because the APR process is something that can be applied, and it should be applied in all areas. I'll give you an example. I work for, one of the clients I have is U.S. Department of Education's Magnet School Assistance Program, and it was designed actually to achieve desegregation by reducing what's called minority group isolation. To break that down, in New York City, where I was stationed for a couple of years on this in New York City's public schools, is if you have a community and that community's demographic is 80% Hispanic, but your school district, your school in that community is 90% Hispanic, you've got to reduce minority group isolation by 10% to achieve parity with what the area is. So how do you try to achieve the reduction of a minority group isolation? You have to do it through a strategic plan. And so actually going out there, doing the research and finding out who our students were, where the students in the neighboring districts were coming from, and actually putting that into a plan to achieve a goal that way actually helped everyone, and it helped empower the school district superintendent. There's 32 community school districts in New York City, so I mean it's just a huge system. So each of them have their own superintendent, and being able to have a plan that can back that up, that was based off research, was actually liberating for her. She said she knew she had a problem, and she knew she had a grant from the U.S. Department of Education, and she was going to throw something on the wall to see if it stuck. And we were able to liberate her a little bit with this kind of a thing. And I'll leave you with a comment. The former superintendent at Folsom Cordova told us when we had to do layoffs, but I apply it to so much. People will eventually get over what you do, but they'll never forget how you did it. And I thought that was so humbling to hear. And you can apply that to your plans, especially when you're talking about such sensitive topics such as diversity and equity and inclusion.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, we're moving to question 4. What are some strategies for engaging students in healthy dialogue about diversity? So how do you engage your students? And we're going to pass the mic off to Heidi.
So thinking about how do you engage your students in this conversation, and then ask yourself, how in your district do you celebrate and honor the student voice? And so when you ask your kids to define diversity, you want to think about, what are the safe spaces that you provide them to do that? And then do you give them platforms? Do you encourage them to celebrate what that means? And so sometimes many districts we do that, but then we don't get out of the way. And sometimes adults can get in the way. Parameters, restrictions, and we want to encourage them to be able to participate in these conversations. Everything from student-led councils to committees, symposiums, student reps that are on the board. There's a school district in Arizona, Carroll School District. I went to visit it and I did a presentation there, and I learned that a student sits on the board member. On the board. They don't make decisions, but they are part of that conversation. And I don't know if that's new to any of you, but that was definitely new to us. And I serve on the Arizona School Boards Association, so I had never heard of anything like that. Also thinking about how do you seek that student voice? Who are all the kids that you celebrate in your schools and in your community? Leslie and Carla did an amazing power hour last year, and I never forget it because I stole some of your stuff, but I still use it, and I give you credit. But I remember one of you said, when you Google kids, what do you see? And it's all these images come up in Google, and if you click on images, and it's just all the same certain kids that just look the same. And for the majority of us, they're just all Caucasian kids. And so those aren't the students that reflect your communities. And so you have to begin to ask yourself and identify, well, who are the kids that are reflective in our community? Do we use them? Do you go past grades and athletics? Right? So these are the students that usually you celebrate at your board meetings. Well, how can you celebrate other students that do other things? And I never forget, years ago when I was at the Deer Valley Unified School District, we had, there's the State Department of Education had this huge grant. It's a $500,000 grant, and it's before and after care, academic intervention, and enrichment programs. And this $500,000 grant targets and identifies schools that have at-risk students. And guess who those at-risk students, guess who they are? Guess how they look like? It's the majority of them are either special ed or they are, represented from a minority group. And so when we worked with 3 of these schools, we did that. So we began to identify that none of these these students will ever be celebrated in their entire lives. We created a huge celebration to celebrate that they participated and they did really good and they were able to increase their scores using this grant. But I never forget when we did this huge celebratory event, I had a mother come up to me who didn't speak English with tears in her eyes, and she says, "Thank you so much for doing this." She goes, "We've been in this country for 2 years." She was like, "And this is the first time anyone has ever celebrated my child." So think about what that says in your district and how you are seeking input from those students. We have board members. I work with 225 school districts, so a lot of board members and a lot of superintendents. And I really, really work to ensure that they, first of all, understand the importance of communication professionals and understand the importance of equity. And I get a lot of board members that come up to us all the time, especially from the small rural areas, and say, "Well, we have a superintendent's student advisory council." Well, who are the kids that sit on the council? Right? Are they the kids that are in trouble? Are they the kids that have dropped out and have come back? Are they the kids that are part of the e-school? No, they're usually certain kids that do certain great things, and they're the ones that are in honor roll, they're the ones in the leadership roles. Well, how are we talking to those other kids and ensuring that they are being represented as well? At our annual conference, we used to have a request for proposal, and districts could submit, and we could celebrate whatever they were doing, and they would present at breakout sessions to thousands of board members. But we started seeing that many of these districts were presenting on things like the shiny new curriculum or how student achievement has increased for a certain percentage of students, but not all students. And we said, well, we're not really moving the needle for all children by doing this, so we need to rethink our approach to what we want being presented at these conferences to ensure that programs that are being presented can be practical and they're adaptable for any school district, a small school district, a rural school district, a tribal school, and then begin to move the needle for all children.
We have a couple minutes. Anybody else?
Something that she said made me think about this. A lot of times we take pictures, we go into a classroom, we take pictures, but are we taking pictures of children who are differently abled? We're starting to see increasingly, like Target does some beautiful ad work with clothing for children who are abled differently, whether the sleeves are longer or it has different kinds of fasteners. What does that mean for those parents to see their children reflected in a magazine article? And I'm a mom. I have 2 kids that I think are precious and cute, and I know every other mom probably thinks their kids are precious and cute. Don't those parents shouldn't they have the joy of feeling a cute, precious picture of their child? And there's something about when you post it on a district piece of collateral, whether it's your Facebook page or a brochure, how does that make that family feel as far as a part of your community? And what does that do for brand ambassadors? They go out and they tell, they grab 20 copies and they give to everybody and, the holiday presents because they're super proud of that their children are represented. And I think that's what we're talking about, is that people are visible, that not only they're physically seen, but their needs are taken care of so that their social emotional learning piece can be addressed as well. I would think, I tend to look at it from a mom's heart, that every mom, dad, guardian, adult, caring adult, caregiver wants the best for their child. And so heart to heart, like, are we doing right by that particular child? Every parent sends, the best of themselves to school every day. It's not like they can pick and choose which child they're going to send, and who gets to go to school and who's not, who stays at home because they don't act right. But our commitment in public schools is that we serve everybody that shows up. And when we say we serve everybody that shows up, we serve everybody that shows up, and we make sure they have the provisions that they need to be successful.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, we're heading into our 5th question. We've got 3 more questions. Here's our 5th question of the live chat. I tweeted it, but I don't have it in front of me. Sorry. Okay, 5th question. Got it. Who bears the greatest responsibility for ensuring students feel safe and valued for their uniqueness? We'll pass the microphone off to Aqui.
Okay. When I first read that question, I thought, is this a trick question? Because isn't this the responsibility of every single educator? So that was my initial response. And I really do think, first of all, I feel it ought to just be said that it is the professional and ethical imperative of every educator to err on the side of justice. And that word justice scares people, but that's what we're talking about. I think, to just dig a little bit deeper into that, I think first, having a board that sets out to be explicit and direct about this being an imperative, equity and inclusion is something that's crucial for all of us. And a board that not only expects that, but empowers the leadership team and the staff to deliver on the strategic plan or the initiatives that are designed for this work, but then also supports that leadership team and that staff when things get messy, because it gets messy, right? And so having a board that truly supports the staff, I think, with this work is important. But then also certainly our teachers are in these classrooms every single day. They're most consistently and directly engaged with our students. And so how do we empower our teachers to do this work in addition to all of the other educators in those school buildings? One of the things that we do as a school district in Cedar Rapids is we have taken on something called the Intercultural Development Inventory, or the IDI, and it's a tool that provides us with information regarding each staff member's place on a continuum of cultural competency. And so out of our 2,700 employees, about 1,000 of our employees have taken the IDI, and we have 31 schools. 9 of our 31 schools have all completed the IDI. And so each employee then takes the IDI, and through this process is paired with a coach, a certified coach, who supports them in their work of gaining more cultural competency as it's measured with the Intercultural Development Inventory. So really focusing with the teachers, with leadership, with the board, and making sure that as a school district, the culture becomes one that understands and shepherds this work that I think is so important.
Okay. Any other panelists? Jump in there.
The question, again, who bears the greatest responsibility for ensuring students feel safe? How do we know how students feel? And a lot of times we find out in a catastrophic event when a kid had killed themselves, and then there are signs and comments about bullying and how they felt the entire time. California has done a really good job with the California Healthy Kids Survey. It's something that happens every 2 years, or every year, but for 5th grade, 7th grade. So it goes. Kids are tested or questioned every 2 years, and they talk about student motivation and how they actually feel to come to school every day. And if you don't have that, something like that in your state, I think as communicators, that could be a very, very good way that we could come up and be involved in it by creating some sort of a climate measuring tool where we ask questions to students about how they actually feel, because it's hard for us to know, and we usually hear it afterwards and in the after effect. So I think that's a potential way that we can assist.
We're also, I don't know if others are, we're also using the high reliability schools framework. I don't know if that's something that other districts are engaged in that particular work, but the first tier of that is safe and collaborative environments. And so using surveys throughout the district to better gauge a child's sense of safety is certainly something that's important that Stephen mentioned. But also, sometimes those day-to-day interactions where it's important for staff members to be fully aware and engaged with how a child is feeling any day of that week, and being able to see exactly when a child is perhaps not on their A game, and then being able to take that time with the child to better determine what might be going on. And I think sometimes having a culture where it's just go, go, go all the time doesn't allow for that truly important engagement between an adult and a child.
Anyone else? A couple more minutes on that question. How many times can we say everyone, 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 huh? I'm just going to urge you again that if no one's having these conversations in your district, lead from where you are. Use whatever circle of influence that you have. It's our responsibility. And, like me in 2016 when no one listened, I have a wonderful boss who supports everything that I do. And when I made that presentation to our leadership team, you could have heard a pin drop. And he literally got up and said, well, I agree with most of what Julie says. And I think he was waiting because he needed to see how they were going to react. And so it's a hard conversation to have, but leave them where you are. Just keep pushing and doing that. Now, so here's our next question, and this is exciting because we're actually going to hand the microphone off to an individual that's winning a gold medallion for a project in this area. No pressure here for this answer, Delana. But I'm trying to get my Twitter up here. I'm struggling. It's on the board. What is one impactful thing your district has done to embrace inclusion, ensure equity, and promote cultural competence? And I'm going to let Delana tell you about her project.
Hi, so my name is Delana McCormack. I'm with the Alexandria City Public Schools in Alexandria, Virginia. We're just across the Potomac, directly south here of DC. And we have about 16,500 students. They come from 114 countries, 119 different languages are spoken. We have about 30% as far as white, African American, Black, and Hispanic, Latino. And then we have a few in the remaining categories as well. So we are very diverse. We also have a history, as many school districts do, with desegregation. If you're in the United States, you probably have gone through this, and I'm glad that Leslie already brought this topic up, because when she said it, I was like, ding, 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 because we are possibly heading down the same path, and luckily we were able to at least sort of put the halt on it through this project that we did, that we're getting the award for. You may know that our school is T.C. Williams High School, and you may know it from the movie Remember the Titans. So if you know anything about that movie, you know that in 1971, 3 high schools, racially segregated, were brought together into one high school, ironically named after the segregationist former superintendent. And so the newly formed football team came together and then, overcame their differences and won the state championship that year in 1971. Makes for a great movie. Denzel Washington, solved everybody's problems at the end, right? It's a great Disney movie ending, right? So fast forward to, and there's a whole lot of truth to it, and there's a whole lot of fiction to it. But fast forward to, last few years, T.C. Williams is bursting at the seams. We are growing rapidly. We are running out of capacity. We have this one school building. We are running out of room. And so many people in our community, although we are a liberal area, we do, and people will say that they embrace diversity and they embrace the topics of inclusion. You'll find that we found that in this problem that we had of trying to find a solution to capacity, we came across this other issue, which is our community is not really as on board with diversity as we thought, because many in the community were saying, we need a second high school, not making the connection to our very, very, very popular history of many high schools, and the fact that if you make a second high school based on our geographic demographics, you're going to have an east side and a west side, and you're going to have resegregation. It's just going to perpetuate that and reintroduce it, whether you want it or not. And so so we launched a campaign that told the stories of not only of our of the 1971 Titans, many of them who were alive this past year, and sadly some of them have now since died in the past few weeks and past few months actually. We told their stories, and then we also told the stories from our current students, because they hear about this movie a lot. However, things have changed. It's interesting to hear from them the things that have changed, and yet how much further we still have to go. And I'd encourage you to take a look at some of the videos that were created by our tremendous staff, showing the stories of our current students, comparing them, contrasting them with the story of desegregation in our district. And then also we took this capacity issue and brought it as an opportunity to also be looking at future opportunities for basically like blowing up the current idea of what a high school is. Like, it doesn't have to be a bunch of kids in one building, and we're thinking about new educational opportunities. and all under the T.C. Williams name. And so we're trying to really think completely out of the box as far as educational programming, which is ultimately what we do in our jobs and in our districts and as educators. But the topic of equity is key to making that happen and making it happen successfully. And so we are on this journey. And so through this campaign, we are able to change a lot of key influencers' minds, including the city council or the city manager, who basically is the CEO of the city, the superintendent of the city, if you will. And he's the one who dictates the budget. And he has now said and used the word equity and recognized it as a key component of our future. And so we have recognized that we are now moving this forward, and it's a journey that continues. And we are moving it forward. We are thinking of immigrants and immigration, because that is a huge population for us. In our high school, we have an international academy. And also, actually, our superintendent is here at NSPRA, and he was inspired, and I'm excited to hear that we might be doing the race card project with our staff, our new staff, that come in at basically our digital convocation, or we're going to have a virtual convocation, I think. And so we might be doing that, and I think that's an exciting way to maybe bring the topic of equity to, so we've elevated this topic of equity as a key component in our district to really, really get at people who didn't make that connection when they say we want a second high school.
All right, there's a couple more minutes. Anybody want to talk about something their district is doing?
If nobody else wants to jump in really quick, I would just want to say that our superintendent also is very much, he's only been in the district a year. He is a graduate of T.C. Williams High School, and so he knows the history as well. And he's really come on board as a great leader in this effort, and equity is at the heart of everything that we're doing for it. And he's actually doing equity training he has done it with our leaders, and now is going to be doing it for all staff. And he bases a lot of what he talks about on this book called Building Equity. And you can look that up, and it'll be in the resources. But something he always refers to is the Building Equity taxonomy. It's a triangle, and basically there's different levels of building that you go through to build equity in education in your district. And he calls it the BET, not, Black Entertainment Television, but he likes to refer to it that way. And I think that it's sort of this book has been described as a how-to, and it also includes equity audits, which are going to be happening at our schools, which I think many people have mentioned. I think is a good thing to start with the research.
We'll try to compile books, resources, speakers, diversity programs that you have brought in, anything that's working, hear more about different ambassador programs, anything that can be adapted for your particular community. We'll put that in the Google Drive, and you can share and add. My Cultural Competence Action Plan is going to change all year long. It's going to be adding more things, more SMART goals, things like that. So I put it in there for you to look at, but just know that I'll be updating it regularly in there, and hopefully we can keep the conversation going. We also need to look in NSPRA Connect and make sure that if there are any resources that we can pull, conversations we can have, or sharing that we can have, that we also don't just limit it to the people in this group who came to this session, but also to all of our colleagues across the nation. Okay, I can't believe it, but we're at our last question. Here is our 7th and final question of the live K-12 PR chat, and who better to pass this one off to than the President-elect. Coming in October 1st will be Leslie Bruinton, and I'm excited to hear what she has to say about what can NSPRA do to help its members champion inclusion, equity, and cultural competence. Leslie?
Thanks, Julie, and thank you for leading this conversation today, because it's been really important. We need people that are willing to step up and champion tough conversations in public forums. So when I look at the question that you've posed on the screen today, the question the word that stands out to me is not the word NSPRA. The word that stands out is help. This is not a job that NSPRA can do alone, but it's a job that members and attendees of the seminar have a responsibility to participate, because help means there's something on the other side. So for NSPRA, what I am hoping I will see is that the continued opportunity to share information, share resources, time to share, that is so critically important, because I get my best learning and some of the downtimes walking between session to session. I'm appreciative of the organization for leading on the conversations of race and equity, gender issues, LGBTQ, equality issues. And I would hope that they continue the conversation, continue facilitating the conversation by encouraging members to participate. I think for members, the part that I would like to see us do is to, I'm from the South, and so a phrase that I've heard a lot growing up is that sometimes you need somebody to tell you that your slip is showing. And what that means is you've got to have a really good friend that's going to step out and say, you know, hey girl, look, this is not how it's going to work. Did you consider this? And you only get to that point when you've built relationships with your colleagues, whether at the seminar or online. But if you don't have those relationships, you're not going to have anybody tell you your slip is showing. So you show up to the cultural competency community conversation, because we like, alliteration here. What happens if your whole plan goes awry? What happens if, in military parlance, if you're off by 2 degrees, you could be 500 miles to the west. And so those small little degrees are so important. And that's why it's so important to have good relationships with your colleagues who will tell you that your slip is showing. Even in planning this conversation, which has been hard and takes a lot of courage for us to sit on stage, be vulnerable, and talk about issues of race and equity, and talk about how that impacts our school system, because we all come here with the idea that we have the best school system, we have the best communications department, nothing ever goes wrong, everything goes right, we get all the budget we ever ask for. What? So when you come here, connect with your colleagues, find someone that you can trust, someone you can call, get a cell phone number. I am happy to serve as a second set of eyes and a set of ears as you're planning. I've done that for other colleagues in this room before, and I've called colleagues in this room before and said, hey, look, this is what's going on in my community. I may be too close to the situation, a little too close to the fire, and I may not be seeing it right. So those things take vulnerability. It also takes courage to do that. And I would encourage you to be the kind of member that could be the support that you would want as a practitioner should you ever have a viral moment, should you ever have an issue of equity, diversity, or inclusion go awry. No one here, there's probably no one that will admit to being purple on that continuum. If you are, man, let me come work for you. Because I think for all of us, this is a journey, and we're not there yet. But the recognition of the fact that we've got to put one foot in front of another and sometimes trudge uphill and do the hard work to do right by kids, that's what it's about. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I just want to add, to continue to have professionals like Heidi Vega, who's in the diversity role, who's pushing the needle for this position and for what its impacts are. I think things like the equity mixer to make sure that our members feel inclusive and feel like that we're reflective of the profession is going to be a big thing to do. And the toolkit, continuing to update resources like that. Conversations about gender equity were not happening when the original toolkit, there were some things, but it feels like light years away from when that one happened, and that was even before I was on that position. So, just being able to, and the toolkit's big and you have to get it published and so forth, but making sure that we can just drive this along so we don't lose the momentum. I think there's been a lot of momentum built over the years as going forward. So maybe talking to someone that might be able to join the task force that can represent a different perspective. It doesn't have to be a racial perspective. It could be an identity perspective that would be really, really good for the organization to do.
Go ahead.
I just want to reiterate what Leslie said and encourage you when you run into an issue or something you don't know the answer to. It could be intimidating to think I might reach out to someone I've never spoken to in real life. But I will tell you, I don't think there's one person on this stage that would turn away your call or text or email or in this room. So please reach out and let someone else be there for you and lift you up, because we all need it at one point in time.
Anyone else? Go ahead.
The only thing that I would add, Stephen, you started talking about this related to resources, is I think one thing that NSPRA actually does very well right now in helping its members is there's a high volume of output of resources year-round, whether it's your benchmarking tools, whether it's your regular newsletters. I mean, there's several different types of newsletters. I mean, it's the principal communicator. These are all things that are at our fingertips every single day as NSPRA members, and I have taken columns from the E Network to my one-on-ones with my superintendent because it has better equipped me to prepare for a specific conversation. So I think that providing more of those from NSPRA, those resources, it could be, 5 ways to ask a question in cabinet so that you don't alienate yourself. Those are the things we get worried about, right? Like, I think folks are in the room here because they're committed to this work and they want to speak up and do what's right. We go back to the realities of our school districts and, maybe we don't necessarily always know what tools we have or what tools to use or strategies we use to initiate those conversations because we're all on a different part of the journey. Maybe we're in different levels of our career. And so I think just some of that more, I think, Stephen, you and I were even talking about this earlier. I think there's the big picture, strategic stuff, there's the tactical stuff, but I feel like there's the in-between. There's the practical application of, here's an entryway into this conversation. Here's something you should have in your back pocket. I think those kinds of resources that are built into what NSPRA already puts out could really help all career levels.
Can I say one more thing?
Absolutely.
Being on the board and leading the equity task force, that is great feedback. And so one huge action item that the task force is going to move forward this year is creating a resource page with all that content that we can have just that one focus on equity. And again, whether, wherever you're at in your journey, but going to NSPRA, being able to click on that one link and then being able to see all these different resources. So that does take some time and effort with the NSPRA staff, since they'll be the ones that would be responsible for it. But Equity Task Force will be leading that initiative and ensuring that by the end of next year we'll be able to say, yes, we love this link, this webpage has all these different resources there, so NSPRA members are able to go there and be able to find different things, whether that's just articles, internal resources, or external resources as well.
Awesome. Okay, so here is the link to the Google Drive. You want to take a picture of this or whatever, you'll be able to access it. I want to thank our panel today. Can we give them a round of applause? It is not easy to share the microphone with 9 public spokespersons, right? Because they know, but they were very gracious in picking some questions and allowing us to do this kind of in a really organized way. But now they can go back. Please add more comments, things you think of, follow up in the chat and share more thoughts, because I know you have lots of pearls of wisdom that you didn't get to share here. To our audience, thank you for being here. Let me say this. So I really appreciate my panel from last year. Raise your hand. I know Leslie was on it and the others are still in the room. This is their long-time commitment to K-12 PR Chat. They came and supported this, and our moderators and are commenting online, even as this panel goes. So I've been taking names and looking at faces. Okay, so next year's live K-12 PR Chat panel will be some of you. And so we want to do that, and so we'll figure out what the next topic is and submit it to NSPRA, and maybe hopefully not wait till the last day at 1 o'clock, and maybe we can sneak in a little earlier. Maybe we know like someone coming in on the board or some individuals that can leverage us a little bit of a better time slot. But I do appreciate it because I know that there are a lot of people actually watching and following at the airport and other places. And Brian Woodland was speaking at the same time, and there were gold mine sessions, and so it was a tough slot. Thank you so much. I want to thank Justin Deering here. He's been handling my the tag board and things. He's my assistant, and even though he's hiding behind the podium, I have a great team, and I am not able to do what I can do at all without their help. And Julie's Ward gave me a box of Kleenex that I have already used earlier. I got myself under control. I'm not a real emotional person, but this is a topic near and dear to my heart and something that I wish we were a little better at. But I am proud of my district, too. for jumping out. It's been very public. We've been in the press. There's been a lot of spotlight on what we weren't doing, and people rolled their sleeves up and they said, let's do this together. So we have an amazing district diversity council, and I can't wait to see what those subcommittees do. I don't even know what my plan's going to look like yet. Isn't that kind of exciting? Like, I don't even know what opportunities there are. And so I hope to learn from some of the documents and resources that we put in here. If you've read a great book, you know of a speaker, shoot me an email. Go ahead and put it in the Google Docs. You have the ability to do that. And just share. That's what this organization is so great about. And as I look at what I have on my Twitter, and it's been there because it's one of my favorite movies, and I just think it sums up school PR so well. I said if it wasn't hard, everyone would do it. The hard's what makes it great, right? So this is a hard topic, and it's a hard thing to tackle, and we're not going to solve it. And it's not just happening in your community. It's history and history and history, going way back. But we have to learn from what we haven't done well. And we've got to do better. And we have, if you sit in a room with kids and you hear them talk, they're not discouraged. They're hopeful. They just want to know that you're listening to them, and they want to know that you're partnering with them on this journey. And so I just encourage you to do that. And it goes a long way just to love other people. Be nice. Love other people. Celebrate them, learn to know them. When we meet face to face with our kids, this is what they tell us all the time. These things happen to them, and I say, well, after we talk about how it makes them feel and everything, I say, well, tell me a little bit about, like, who does this to you? Who says these things? Do you ever think that? Who says these horrible things, right? I know it happens, but, like, where do you hear them, whatever? It's very rarely they're close friends. It's very rarely people that know them. The underlying theme all the time is that it's people who don't know. You don't know what you don't know. And there's a lot of people in our communities, they just don't know that what they're saying and doing or not saying is hurting. And so I really encourage you to get in front of your students. Thank you so much for being here and for being at the conference. And you got a little breather now, right, before the banquet. So congratulations to our gold medallion winner that's on the stage here, and also to others, and really great resources. And thank you so much, and keep the conversation going. You have my contact information, and grab that handout because it has all of their contact information. Thank you very much. Enjoy your afternoon.